In this video, we're going to continue looking through the GT book in our quest to go from advanced beginners in GT to intermediate developers. So I'm assuming that you've already bought into the idea of multiple development, that you've watched a ton of videos on that topic from the Glamorous Toolkit YouTube page and others, that you've watched the 7-minute videos multiple times and even used GT to start solving your own problems. So what I want to do is walk through some of the things that are in the book that are great ways to control your own learning, but there's a ton in there, and sometimes people just need motivation to look through. So I'm a database person, and that's what I use GT for, is connecting to databases and explaining database related systems. So let's work through this part of the book. I'm on a Windows box that I resurrected specifically for this purpose. So it doesn't have most of my GT stuff on it. My daily driver is a couple of different Macs. So that's what where I usually use GT. Open the window over here. We kind of missed the initial font change, so we'll look at the startup script. So that was the first run. And I have a page here to where it's easy to look at the startup script. So if you this is mentioned in the GT Discord every once in a while about startup scripts, but that's a Pharaoh thing, not really a GT thing. It's part of the underlying Pharaoh system, so they may not go into it a lot, and if the documentation is going to be discuss more on the Pharaoh sides, but we can, as long as you remember that the object is startup preferences loader, we can browse that with Command B. And there's a good comment in the startup preferences loader object that tells you how to use it. So I always keep this class method handy to see where my preferences are loading from, which I have them in specifically in the path. Specifically in Pharaoh 11, it looks like this is, since this is window, it's in app data. So let's see what's in my startup script. I set the zoom factor because it's better on this resolution monitor. I was super proud of myself a couple of years ago when I figured out how to slow down the scroll in Windows. I have no idea whether this is still useful or not, but this is I was able to scroll down the mouse scroll wheel in Windows. This is from the book. It's how to set credentials that match your GitHub SSH credentials that you've already set up on GitHub, and then using that to load a private repo. So that's all I have loaded on this GT, so that's what's run so far. We want to look at Postgres page in the book. And this loads data from another Leopard database, so we can just kind of look under the covers and see what's happening when we run these things. So new folder called Pharaoh local, and then iceberg. So that's where it's going to keep all the repos that get cloned from GitHub. So the one we looked at before that was loaded from the startup script. This one was created when I clicked that snippet and to load the GT4 P3, which depends on the P3 Pharaoh library, Pharaoh repo and packages that use FFI to interface with the modules for the Postgres driver. So it should all be downloaded now. This is blue now, indicating that it knows that that link is live. So this is the Leopard database that was loaded from that repo. We could expand out, see the table of contents. We'll start walking through this. It's a great thing about Leopard and GT in general, that an author can tailor how information is presented to a specific audience, and this is the way that whoever wrote this section decided to tailor our journey. So let's walk through it mostly this way. I'll deviate a couple of times. This is going to point to a publicly available Postgres instance. It looks like running in Europe. Since I'm a database person, I used some of the files that we'll look at later to run a Docker image on my local machine that I loaded with the same Formula One data. So I'm going to change this to localhost. This works fine the way it is, but it's fun to set up your own if you're into that kind of thing. And it's a bit faster just because I'm a few thousand miles away from wherever this is. All right, so Scott's the user, Tiger's the password. It's running localhost, 5432 is the normal Postgres port. F1DB is the database that got installed, and we can run that. So we're looking at on the right is an inspector over a P3 client object, and it gives us the URL it's going to use. It's currently not connected, but we have several different built-in views, and when we click on this one, it's going to make a connection to list the tables that are in my database. And now it says connected. It gave us a session ID of 1477. I don't know if that's the PID or related to that on Windows, but we can use that. I just want to point that out to distinguish it from this next connection type. So here's another example of using a Magritte form to so that this has been extended so that it knows how to have Postgres login snippet and a PostgreSQL snippet. It's going to use that once it's connected. So let's do that same thing. Scott's the user, Tiger's a password, and don't worry about SSL. So this one was 1477. This new one is 1479. So this is a different object than the one that was here, which is 1477. And we can, now that this page is connected through this login snippet, now this Postgres snippet you'll see picked up this colon 1479, and we can run Postgres queries and pull back the data that's in a table. We're going to look through this data more as we walk through this these snippets. So let's keep going. All right, so we can also explore from file. So currently, this folder that's being pointed to doesn't exist, but when we run this to pull a new repository in, and then if you don't know, when you run an object and you navigate away from it, you get this little gray circle, and you can, instead of re-executing a previous snippet, you can just find the gray circle and click on it, and it'll take you back to that. And now that's refreshed because now I have files here. So let's see what it downloaded. Some SQL files, some data itself. Let's look inside the Docker file. So this Docker file is going to use the latest Postgres image, the official Postgres image, create a new local image from that, install some stuff, and then copy these two files to our startup script. This is part of what is set up by this Postgres thing. So if you read the documentation for the Postgres image, you can read about what's supposed to be in here. So let's see what is in 00. All right, it creates a new user and database, and that's why we used Scott and Tiger, because we ran this to create our container, and then it's going to setup script is going to download the data, download the compressed version of the data, run that in, and run some SQL. So let's look at the schema SQL. So even though this says MySQL, this is actually Postgres that's been prepared for us by the person who maintains the Postgres driver. So we have a bunch of DDL to create tables, and then in the constraints, we apply a bunch of constraints. Those are going to be used to let GT navigate among tables and build some nice visualization. So that's what's in these files. Let's go back a page. Okay, so now let's let this pSQL schema importer run over that same information, and very quickly it parses the data that's in the DDL. Those DDL scripts found that there's two different schemas involved. That one of those is called public. Here's the tables that are there. Very quickly could generate an ER diagram of all of those tables based on all of those constraints. So that's super fast. All right, so that's files. Now we can compare those things together. Before we do that, there's one other place I need to change to get my, make sure it's using my local connection, because now instead of using a snippet directly to connect to the database, this example object is going to connect to the database. So let's change that. Stat tiger. Let's do localhost. But 432. No SSL. Let's check mark that. And then while we're here, I found in messing with these that GT in general and this object do some aggressive caching of the database connection, which is fine. That's normally what you would want. But once it gets that, once it gets a connection because of the cache, it wants to hold on to that as we go through some of these other examples. So I just want to make sure that I'm actually heading against my version of the database. So I'm just going to execute that highlighted. And yeah, we can see that it's in my local host. I've snuck an extra T1 table in here just to have something different from the default that was created in the Docker image. So yeah, it's using ours. So all right, so now this is going to be a reference to that same set of SQL, and then this is going to import the script DDL just like we saw, and it's gonna looks like compare that to what it's going to get from the database. So let's run this. And this is one of the reasons I just did my own version, is because this can take, that little thing takes 30-40 seconds depending on the time of day, as if you're connected to the, for me, connected to the European server several thousand miles away. So as you saw, connecting locally, that was a second or two. And like I said, I deliberately put a additional table in the database side just so we could see, since I created my Postgres data from the same SQL files, the same schema. This was just, a blank screen here, but we can see when we do make a change to one side or the other, it gets picked up here, and you can compare how things are different between what's on disk in some files versus what's in your database. So that comes up quite often in real life. All right, now let's see, this is going to walk us through what else is available through Postgres. So looks like we're going to connect to the database, export the schema. wrap results according to the kind of moldable style that's documented in the book, and then add some views to generic objects. So the reason I went ahead and changed it previously, but because this example object gets reused as part of this documentation, and like I said, once you make that connection, then it's pretty sticky. So I learned as I was messing with this to just go ahead and change it early, and that way this page works really well. So this is going to walk us through kind of top to bottom. I really like the left to right style, and we'll look at that also. But that's one thing about Leopard, being able to choose for your audience how you're going to walk through some things. So if you're not used to this style with embedded results, you can hover over the result and see this is where that came from. This is the Leopard markup language that says to grab this method from this class, and then expanded equals true is why it shows up here. And then you can even choose which, this is a live object just like everything in GT, this preview select tells which view you want selected when you do it. So we can just scroll down and see how they're walking us through these elements. So that was the URL. This is the client itself, which we've seen this details tab before. You can see it is connected. Then it's just going to walk us, so it's going to use the same style and just change the preview select to the various tabs. So settings, these are the settings that are inside the database. Schemas, so here's the 3 schemas it finds inside that connection. The databases. Properties of the database. A lot of times if you're not a DBA, you don't care much or mess with this, but now that a lot of times we're our own DBAs for a lot of reasons, so this is you might need to look at. You can also run queries and get a result. So what we're looking at here is an inspector over a P3 result, which was the result of running this query. So we ask our example object to run this query. We get back a result. That now we're pointing to the table. You can also point to the columns. So I really like, while we're here, I'll go ahead and open one of these results to the right. So I tend to explore this way. Left to right instead of up and down. But we can, once again, just look at the tables. If you double click, you can dive into a specific table. So inside the table, it'll tell you the details, the structure, constraints. So again, this is one reason we're going locally. Clicking this ER diagram is going to be super fast. So these are the constraints that apply, or the relationships that apply to this one, to just to circuits to races. But if we look at something like races itself, it's related to a lot of tables. And then that we would expect that when we click on this constraints view, it's going to be have a bunch of stuff in it, and it does. So it tells how it's related to other tables. Results. Those about races, drivers, constructors, and status. So let's say we dove into there. We can go back. We've already seen kind of what's in the schemas. If you know about Postgres, then none of this will surprise you. What's in the information schema, metadata about the database. Never clicked on the ER diagram here. Okay, they're not much related to each other. They're just a list of tables, which was a list of views, which is a pretty long list here. Our data, our actual business data, is in the public. A very convenient little window to run SQL. that even has a colorizer. And of course, as with anything in GT, you can option or alt click and see what the view is that built this. This is the most complex view of these probably up here because it's got it's going to make this little text area, but let's go into tables. So tables uses a tables method of my schema or my connection, and yeah, makes a column list of tables. So straightforward GT stuff, but applied in database context. All right, let's see what else they're going to walk us through here. So a much more detailed explanation of walking through that schema object. So in this case, we're now programmatically going to select which schema we want. So we want public schema, and then we have the tables. And then instead of clicking into a table, we can use, again, programmatically pick a table. So now we're going to pick the circuits table. And same functionality that we saw before. Just walking through the different columns. Races table. Yeah, walking through the columns, just like we did a minute ago. And even gave a name to races table contents. So there's a query all method, which we can, let's dive in and see what that looks like. Let's open this to the side. Oh, let's open this to the side. So here we have a table. Query all isn't in here. So let's see if it's up at the parent level. So this knows about its table. Did I miss query all? I must have missed it. Let's grab just this object. Command G. Oh, but it's opening over there. It's opening over here. All right. Still a table rows. Like the table itself. I don't know if I got that before or not. It's still table rows. No, there's the table right here. Okay. So here's the table object. Okay, but when I open it, it's going to grab the whole thing. So let's just look here at this. Let's see, there should probably be another way to do it. Don't know. But let's see, now we can look here in this table object. And in there, oh, trying to scroll. There's one thing about this type of view is I find the scrolling, it's hard for GT to know what I want to scroll on. So I'd like to open it to the side, but it's actually opening this to the side, not what I have selected. So we can just do this over here. Let's go get our connect. Well, there was one of these that showed the table. Probably should just use that instead. Here's the table object. Okay, so here's a client table, and query all is what we were looking for. Query all statement. Okay, so that's what I was looking for. Let's just wanted to see how this query all was implemented. And it looks like it's select star from the table name, limit of 10,240 rows. So that's what we get when we run this query all method down here. Okay, let's see. Okay, so we can dive specifically into one of the rows. And then we'll come back to look at, on this generic P3 client table row, right? We actually have a specific thing for our race. So we can look and see how that's implemented. References. So this is all the references through the foreign keys. They're showing us the ER diagram, full ER diagram. Cool. So that's how they're walking us through exploring databases with this object. Of course, what we really are concerned with in GT, or once we kind of move beyond the generic, is wrapping database results. Really like how they're talking about it now in the book. Let's double check. Let's go to that if you haven't read that part. Super important to start really getting into the GT philosophy. They're looking at this section of moldable patterns. It's moldable collection wrapper and moldable data wrapper around a moldable object. So read that stuff if you haven't. So we're going to look and see how they've implemented that here. So this is using our same, this is using a different object. Hopefully it's using our same connection URL, but it is reusing our connection URL. So that's good. So we're still connected to my local version. And then they've wrapped up this set of rows that come back with some views. So you should understand how views are implemented, but it always is good to look. It's something you do no matter how advanced you get. You look at other people's views. So let's see how this seasons view is implemented. So it's going to call the seasons object or seasons method on this demo object, which we just saw is reusing the connection from that other example object we had on the previous page. If we look at seasons, I would expect it to be select star from seasons. Select stars from seasons, order by year descending. That's what it's going to do. And then when we looked at this, so in this P3 client, it looks like that knows how to return its records as dictionaries. The reason we're doing that is so that we can implement that moldable collection wrapper. So instead of being dependent on, the idiosyncrasies of this P3 client, it gets turned into a dictionary so that we can wrap it into our domain object for this F1 season object. And then, just a straightforward column list to get the year and URL from that from this seasons object. In fact, let's look at this season object. Just gonna browse, can grab it. I don't know if it went in G from here. No, it's a temp, got a temp in it. So let's just browse the command B class. And yeah, there's the reason I was doing this. The reason we can just say pound year and pound URL is because those are symbols that point directly to a method, which you can put into here. So year and URL, the long form version of this is a lambda or a closure, a block, where we take in some stuff and we're going to call each year, right? So that's equivalent. So if we go back and look at this, we get the same thing, right? So that's equivalent. But there's a shortcut when you have Smalltalk shorthand. When you have this pattern, instead of having to make a variable inside your block and then call that on it. So if you have it and you're just calling a specific function on that, or method, you can just do that. And yeah, we saw that inside that seasons object, that would have been one way to grab it. Do that. Oh, no, we couldn't. Didn't know who self was, but we could get it from here. Oops, it didn't like that I didn't clear that message. Yeah, from in here we can grab this seasons object, which is a wrapped version of the results of the set of rows that we get back. And each one of these is going to be an F1 season object. And then inside there, we see that we have a method to get the URL, which is just going to be self object at URL. Oh, yeah, I did want to point that out. You'll see in this one, I don't know if this is kind of older than some of the other documentation. This is exactly the same pattern that's used in like the GitHub organization, the GH organization. If you watch which you should many times, watch the 7-minute video. This is a raw data object. They just called it object here instead of raw data. So, but it's used the same as the raw data slots in kind of the other GT examples. So anytime you see this object in these F1 things, it's what we call raw data. What now in the documentation is a lot of times raw data. All right, so that's wrapped up the results of the query of seasons into a domain object that's called seasons. And now we can start talking about seasons and a season instead of database rows. And that's usually how we proceed in explaining data in GT, is to wrap these generic formats into a domain object. So that was seasons. And then once you have a season, if you want to call out something specific like season 2020, you can go through your seasons and get just 2020. And so now we have a season 2020 object. And inside there, we can see that they pulled out the races for that. And just go through that same pattern again, let's see how races is implemented. So I'm going to command click on, or alt click on races, see the source. Okay, it's got a F1 races object. Inside there, it selects star from race, where year is the year of myself. So self.year, right? So as a season object, I know my year. So I can get my year and then use that to pull more data from a different source as my year. So now I can create an F1 object or season object for 2020, and then look at all the races for that. Let's see, we can dive into the races. Anything special there? Yep, results. So this is another. So details is kind of generic view. There's probably a GT details for method, so let's dive into that and see. Yeah, that's GT view details for. So that's a common pattern you'll see throughout this, throughout GT, and start recognizing those. But then this is really a custom results. That's going to be from the results table, where the year is 2020 and the race is this Austrian Grand Prix. It probably uses the race ID or something like that. We can go in there and look. Results for, here's the results object. So that means I'm going to have a results object here. So yeah, where the race ID is that, and in order to get the driver name that we saw, it's going to jump out to the drivers table and join that in. So that's how it's pulling this the data for this race results tab. And we want to see Valtteri Bottas's name, not driver 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The standings as of this race, because we saw there was a standings table, there's a constructor standings table, what team built that car, and then the driver standings is how great way to make F1 exciting throughout the year, because only one person wins a race, but we have this kind of meta driver championship going on where there's points for every race. And of course, you can see it in that year, which this is still true. Yeah, this is the current, this is what they do now, still in 2024. This is how many points you get for that. Since this is the first race, you can tell how many points people got, and then that's going to change a lot, the spread, by the time we get down to the race number 14. Bottas is, I think Lewis is going to win this year, so he's going to have the most. And we can even see who's the winner after who's ahead at the last race. Lewis Hamilton won, Valtteri second. They're on the same team. Starting after this year, Max is going to win 3 years in a row. Daniel Ricciardo still racing. And that's really what you want as you walk through database stuff, is to talk about the business stuff inside the data and not talk about database rows. And that's what GT does, is get us to that point fast. Final, we'll go custom views for generic objects. I think this is kind of a demo. You really would not extend the P3, a P3 object to have your client. I think the more often we get people to wrap their database results in new objects rather than extending an object from somebody else's library and wrapping it with your domain specific stuff. Of course, we do that function a lot. To like that's how the SQL, when we clicked on those SQL files, it knows to use the SQL parser to provide highlighting, because somebody has extended the generic file object to be able to recognize the SQL file extension. So that's a very common thing, but I don't think we'd probably recommend extending your database driver with objects that know about the tables that are in there. So this, I think, we would consider just an example. So yeah, you can read down through here to do that. I do want to make sure they give the practical advice of how an extension actually works. So let's look at this one. So this is a generic. So this is we're looking on the right side, an inspector over a P3 client table rows object, which is normally just going to be the table rows, right? But in this case, it's been extended to know about races. So let's see how I did that. Okay, it's a composite view. And if the table name that I'm looking at, so this is like, I could be looking at a DNA database or a customer database or whatever. And if I happen to have a table that's named races, then this view is going to kick in. That's why you don't kind of extend normally this way. So we should be able to find the, let's go looking around for this P3 client table row object. I'm going to browse just the class of that. And then for the category, yeah. So this, if you haven't run across this, it's a Pharaoh thing. Super basic, so basic that people who know Pharaoh don't even talk about it much. But this is how you extend objects that are given from a different package. So it could be something that's built into Pharaoh itself, or that's provided by GT, or in our case, the P3 library, which is, so this package is Toolkit P3, but it's going to extend this client table row with these methods. So that's why this race is going to show up, because race results. So, well, we already saw that, right? Race results. This is going to be the extra stuff, but GT race details for, or races for, race results for. Yeah, if the table I'm looking at is named races, it's going to try to do these things. So I may not have these things. So this makes a lot of assumptions about the races table you're looking at. So that's why I think I would just consider this an example of how to do an extension, which is to give the category of the method you're making star and your package name. That way, when it gets filed out to, or well, when it gets, when Iceberg is able to make a new repo, or connect to GitHub or Git for a repo, it's going to put this in your repo, not the repo of the person providing the original package. So it's an extension, and the way you enable that is by star and then your package name listed, so that way it shows up as part of your package. But everybody who uses this GT system or this Pharaoh system is going to get the advantage of these extensions to a built-in or otherwise provided object from your package. So I found that to be kind of a confusing thing for me early on, was how these people were modifying GT itself or Pharaoh itself, and then loading that later, and it's through that extension system. So that's what this is explaining, is just an alternate way to provide these views by extending the objects. The F1 data, so this explains a little bit of the F1 data. This uses a repo from Ergast, which 2024 is the last year we're getting the Ergast data. He's passing that off, or they're passing that off to somebody else. So if you go to the Ergast website that's linked in here, you'll see that that points to a different repo that's going to provide data for the 2025 and future seasons. So as you poke around the book, there's a lot of great stuff in here, and they do take a long time to get through. So buckle up, get ready to study, and load some of these extra repos that really explain the details of GT, and that's how you go from beginner to intermediate, is just gathering more and more of these skills, learning more and more about what GT is capable of.